So I know some of you had asked me about an off-season predictions video on what moves I expect the Bulls to make specifically as it relates to the current roster and who will be on the team or not at the start of next season. Now, this is a pretty important offseason for the Bulls because unlike last year where we knew that this past season was going to be an evaluation year for the new front office, with the trade that they made for Vucevic at the deadline, the Bulls are going to need to start showing results that the moves that they made were actually worth it, and I fully expect this to be a very active offseason for the Bulls, partially because they have a lot of expiring contracts, giving them cap space to bring in other pieces, and also because Arturas himself said that they are not done in improving this roster. He's been very vocal about that point. So for this video, let's talk about which players that are currently on the Bulls team will be staying with them at the start of the 2021-22 season and which will be wearing new uniforms starting next year. So what's going on, everyone? You are listening to Bulls Central here. Hope you're all doing well. So as much of a disappointment as it was for the Bulls missing the playoffs this season for the fourth straight year, especially in an expanded playoffs, missing the playoffs yet again next season with the roster that they have and now being 2 seasons under a new coach and front office would be an absolute embarrassment. Not saying that we should all expect the Bulls to be title contenders or even fringe contenders next season, but making the playoffs shouldn't be too much to ask for, given you know that we have a full offseason and training camp with Vucevic and the other acquisitions. And of course, hopefully you would think that the Bulls would bring in some new players that really beef up this roster. So as far as who will be staying with this group and who is leaving, well, I'm going to start with all the players currently on the Bulls who I think will remain with the team. Not necessarily what I want, but what, as I've talked about before, but who I realistically think the front office will keep around. And then of course, once the season starts, we can go back to this video and see how wrong I was. So as far as who's staying, well, let's start with the definites, the people that are for sure going to be returning. Zach Lavine, Nikola Vucevic, they're not going anywhere. They're the core that the team is building around. You know, these 2 all-stars that the front office is hoping to use as leverage in attracting other free agents and really making the Bulls a free agency destination. I mean, there's no way that the Bulls would look to trade Vucevic after just bringing him in, unless of course this is some crazy master plan of Arturas to try and trade up even further with another piece package with Vucevic that would improve the roster, but I just don't see that happening. The other lock to return is Patrick Williams. This is Arturas' draft pick, one of the few players that have been hand selected by the new front office and not a player from the old regime. You use a very high draft pick, a big investment on someone like Patrick Williams, and the potential the kid has at being an incredible defender and hopefully will even start improving his offensive game as well. He is going to be a huge building piece for this team in the future. And barring some, team that would be willing to provide a ridiculous haul in return for him via a trade, Patrick Williams isn't going to be going anywhere. Next, as far as who is staying, I believe Coby White will also be staying. He's not a for sure lock to, like the other guys that I mentioned, but I would say more likely than not, the front office is going to hold on to him. I know that there's always been debate on whether Coby fits with this team overall because he's more of a shooting guard, he plays better off the ball, which I think all of that is true, but he was showing that he has the capability to be a decent playmaker, and we saw that towards the end of the season, with his improved decision making, court vision, and the ability to turn the ball over significantly less than what we saw at the beginning of the year. Given his age, the fact that he has, even been able to play a full season, or he hasn't been able to play a full season in his 2 years in the league, it would be way too early to give up on him now, unless of course you're getting a better return for him via a trade. Given, he's still on a cheap rookie salary deal, it just wouldn't make sense for the Bulls to let him go, as it doesn't impact their books all that much. And for a young and talented player as he is, you have to at least give it one more season before saying he's not going to work on this roster. Another guy who I believe is going to be staying, and I know most people are probably going to disagree with this one, but that's Daniel Theis. Not only is he a guy that I want the Bulls to pursue and keeping, but I actually think that they will prioritize and holding on to him. Now, Theis is going to be a free agent this offseason because the Bulls hold his bird rights. They're actually able to offer more than any other team would. The question is, how much are they going to be willing to pay him relative to what his market value is? Because there are going to be a lot of teams who are going to want Theis. He provides energy and rim protection that any team could always use. And for the Bulls, though, because they're in such need of a rim protector to pair alongside Vucevic, whether that's Theis starting at the 4 or a backup behind Vucevic at the 5, the Bulls are going to need that defense. You take away Tice from this team, the Bulls have zero rim protection. That's not to say that they can't get it somewhere else in free agency, but why not Tice when he is actually going to be a free agent? And you already know what to expect given the fact that he's been on this team for the past few months. So I suspect that the front office, they're going to make Tyson an offer, a reasonable offer so it doesn't break the payroll, but enough to where it would be more than other teams would be able to provide to ensure that they maintain that rim protection, but also leaving enough cap space to bring in a playmaking point guard, which we know is likely going to be the goal in free agency this offseason. Another guy I think that the Bulls are going to keep, and I actually think this is probably going to be more of a lock than Tice and Coby White, and that's Troy Brown Jr., really because the front office, they targeted this guy in a trade and wanted to bring him in for his youth, his defense, and athleticism. He was a solid player for the Bulls post-trade deadline before getting sidelined for the final 15 games of the season. If he improves that three-point shot, I honestly wouldn't be shocked if he ends up in the Bulls starting lineup next season and moving Patrick Williams to the 4, just because the Bulls could use his great wing defense in the starting unit. Something the starting group really lacked all season was a strong defender. I mean, aside from Patrick Williams anyway, he was really the only guy in that first unit that could play high quality D. Like some other younger guys, Troy Brown Jr. is also on his rookie scale deal, which is significantly less and doesn't impact the Bulls' overall payroll as much. And given how young he is and potential that he has, the Bulls are not going to be moving on from him. And then finally, the last guy I see staying with the Bulls next season. Yes, only one more player. I see a lot of guys leaving on this team, and I'll explain why in a little bit. But even for this one, I honestly go back and forth on it quite a bit for a number of reasons. And of course, the player is Thaddeus Young. So Thaddeus Young is one player that is on a partially guaranteed contract for the final year of his deal, with $6 million guaranteed to him, even if the Bulls choose to waive him, or they could exercise the final year of his deal and fully guarantee it at $14.2 million, which, let's be honest, even for the incredible season that Thaddeus Young did have, that's a pretty big hit to the Bulls salary cap for someone his age. He's going to be 33 next season, going into his 15th year in the league. Are the Bulls confident that he will be able to maintain the same level of play, or will he start to decline, making that contract regrettable? But I'm inclined to think that because of Thad's value that he brings to the team both on and off the court, the versatility that he offers, and the experience needed for a young team, they're likely going to bring him back rather than just waiving him and taking a $6 million cap hit. At that point, you might as well keep Thaddeus Young rather than just throw away $6 million towards your cap for nothing. The only potential I could see, but I also don't think that's very likely, is that they fully guarantee Thad's deal and then trade him to a contending team who is in need of a veteran leader in exchange for a younger piece or even a draft pick, but I doubt that happens. They're likely just going to keep Thaddeus and see how he does in the final year of his deal, especially since him and Lavine are such good friends, and I think it would be a hit to Zach's morale if they were to let him go. So now for the guys who I don't see returning with the team. Well, let me start with the obvious ones. Cristiano Felicio, the 4 years, $32 million contract that Garpax gave him is finally up, and the Bulls will not be renewing it. Otherwise, I may just have to stop being a Bulls fan altogether. I really don't see Felicio returning to the league after the season. I would suspect he'll likely be heading back home to play over in Brazil. Denzel Valentine, gone. At least he better be anyway. I don't see how there is any way the front office offers him an extension. I'm sure he'll get a minimum contract from some other team in the league, but really nothing beyond that. Ryan Arcidiacono, as I've said before, I respect how hard he works for someone his size and his lack of athleticism. You wouldn't think that he'd be in the league, but he hustles and he works hard. But no, the front office isn't going to exercise the team option for his $3 million contract. And I think Archie is likely another player who won't receive another NBA deal. I suspect to see him playing overseas or in the G League. So those are the obvious ones. Now, the other players that I don't see returning, again, not saying that these are players I don't want returning, but I either just don't see them coming back either because of their fit with the roster or the fact that their contracts are likely going to be too high on the payroll for the value that they provide. Let's start with Javonte Green. I actually hope that the Bulls do hold on to Green. I think he's really earned his place as a rotational player for the Bulls in those final games of the season, and the Bulls really, could retain him for a cheap offer with a qualifying offer of $1.9 million. But I don't think Green is really in the front office's future, given he's 28, and it's unlikely that there is, still development or potential to get better for him in the future. I do still like his energy, that he hustles, that he brings on both ends of the floor, but doubt that the Bulls extend him that qualifying offer. Next, Al-Farouq Aminu. Now, I think most people are probably assuming he's staying with the team, especially after he just exercised his player option to remain with the Bulls for the final year of his contract at $10.2 million. But despite him being under contract with the Bulls and the Bulls unlikely to find a trade for him because he really doesn't offer a ton of value at this stage in his career, I think that the Bulls are actually going to waive him and use the stretch provision and have that $10.2 million sit on the book stretched out over 3 years, so that way all of it isn't eaten up at once for this season, so it gives the Bulls more cap flexibility. Then we have Satoransky, who I still like as a player. He's one of those guys that will do whatever he's asked, whether it's starting, coming off the bench. He provides decent playmaking and is one of those few guys on the roster who has a decent skill set in running an offense. He also stepped up nicely when the Bulls chose to bench Coby White for a portion of the year, but the fact of the matter remains that the Bulls are likely going to aim at upgrading the point guard position, and since Sato's final year of his contract is only partially guaranteed at $5 million, rather than the Bulls fully guaranteeing the last year of his deal and paying Satoransky $10 million to come off the bench for next season, I think that they're going to waive him and just take that $5 million cap hit to free up some additional space for another player, say like Daniel Tice, who I mentioned I think will be staying. Then you have Garrett Temple, who I've said before, he was one of the biggest surprise players for me anyway of the season, and one of the most underrated free agency signings in the league for the amount that the Bulls were able to get him for. I love Temple's basketball IQ, his veteran voice and leadership on and off the court. He's scrappy on defense, which I love, but he can also get you some big shots on offense late in game. The Bulls always looked more and more calm and collected when he was on the court, and as much as I hope that the Bulls do bring him back, I think the price tag for Temple is likely going to be too high for a contending team that needs a veteran voice off the bench, and too high for the Bulls to offer more, given they're going to need to have as much cap space as possible to fill out this roster. Anything more than $5 million for Garrett Temple, who is going to be 35 next season, is too much and not something the Bulls are going to be willing to go on a bidding war for. And then finally, Lauri Markkanen. If you had asked me at the beginning of the season, even though him and the Bulls were unable to agree upon an extension, I would have said the Bulls will find a way to make it work and keep Lauri as a restricted free agent, especially because I thought he was going to have a bounce back year. Well, although Lauri improved his overall offensive efficiency, shooting from three was above 40% for the first time in his career, but he also regressed in terms of his rebounding, overall ability to score and driving to the basket, and defensively, he did not improve at all. In fact, you could argue it was worse than what it was last season, which is saying a lot. Now, because Lauri, still offers a valuable skill set in the NBA, being a stretch four who can shoot above average from outside, there are going to be teams interested in Markkanen, and I think he's going to get some good offers. And because he's going to get some good offers, the Bulls are going to be unwilling to match, or they would match and then trade him, because I do think the Bulls, would be open to bringing Lauri back if it was closer to the $10 million a year range. His qualifying offer is $9 million, by the way. But he's likely going to be getting an offer sheet from a team that is much higher than that, and the Bulls are not going to be wanting to match a salary and have a contract that high on their books, not just for this season, but also going forward and looking ahead at Zach LaVine's free agency next year. So for that reason, I'm inclined to believe that Markkanen will not be returning to Chicago next season. Of course, this doesn't address what the Bulls may potentially do to fill out the roster, given that there's going to be so many open spots, especially if my predictions hold true in terms of who is staying and leaving, since I've got a lot of guys who I don't think will be coming back. So who do I think the Bulls will be bringing into the team, whether through a trade or free agency? Well, I've talked about this in past videos, but I'll have my breakdown of who the Bulls should bring in based on the openings that I just mentioned and the players that will be remaining on the roster. I'll have that out in tomorrow's video, if not on Saturday. So be on the lookout for that. As always, guys, be sure to subscribe if you're a Bulls fan, as I do post daily Bulls content. Thanks again for tuning in, guys, and I will catch you in the next one.